If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Mark chapter 6. We're still working our way through the Gospel of Mark in a series called Discovering Jesus. Mark's the first written account of Jesus' life, and so we're just looking at this biography of him and asking the question, who is Jesus of Nazareth that turned the world on its head? You know, we all hate the sting of rejection. We've all probably experienced it to some, degrees, one or the other. And whether you've been rejected by maybe a job you were hoping for, or that prom date with that girl you were really excited about, it never feels good. Rejection never feels good. I think I've shared the story before, but when I first called this cute, young, native Montana girl to ask her on a date, I didn't get a yes, I didn't get a no, all I got was a click. She hung up on me. But hey, obviously it worked out 3 kids later. But none of us like rejection. Some rejection is more serious than others, but they always leave some sort of a sting or maybe a real deep wound. We all want to be accepted, especially by those who are closest to us. So much so that sometimes we hide parts of who we are. Both the good and the bad. We learn maybe even at a young age what people like and what people don't. And so we sort of, as a defense mechanism, start to kind of edit ourselves out to try to not experience any rejection. So we hide parts of us or maybe even part of our beliefs because we are worried that it's going to lead to that rejection. Now with the world of social media, I think it's even more intense, especially for young people, because everybody's so afraid of cancel culture. You say one wrong thing or one offensive thing, and you're excommunicated. If we even look back just a decade ago, celebrities were saying things, what's a decade, 10 years? Like 15 years ago, celebrities were saying things that would get them totally excommunicated by now. Not to be controversial, but in 2008, Obama said he was against same-sex marriage. Can you imagine him saying that now? No way. Or, I don't remember the exact quote, but I was watching this video of the inside the NBA guys like Charles Barkley before cancel culture, and some of the things that they would say they'd be fired today. So it feels like in today's day and age, you can't even speak the truth because, one, you're afraid of cancel culture or it's considered hate speech, even if it's scientifically proven things. But it's even true within the Christian circle, where there's a sort of Christian cancel culture within the church, where we become so hyper aware of and paranoid of false teaching and things, where we become sort of heresy hunters. And we're just waiting to pounce when somebody says something just wrong enough. Because we're all afraid of this rejection, and so the temptation is to just kind of go with the flow and cave on what we believe to be true so that we don't have to deal with rejection. Or maybe we don't cave, but we never talk about what we actually believe. But Jesus himself experienced this rejection, and he actually experienced it from those closest to him. Yet it didn't cause him to back down or cave on truth. Let's read Mark 6, 1 through 13. It says, "He left there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. 'Where did this man get these things?' they said. 'What is this wisdom that has been given to him? And how are these miracles performed by his hands? Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And aren't his sisters here with us?' So they were offended by him. Jesus said to them, 'A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, among his relatives and his household.' He was not able to do a miracle there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them, and he was amazed at their unbelief. He was going around the villages teaching. He summoned the 12 and began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over unclean spirits. He instructed them to take nothing for the road except a staff, no bread, no traveling bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on an extra shirt. He said to them, 'Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that place. If any place does not welcome you or listen to you, when you leave there, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons, anointed many sick people with oil, and healed them. The truth is, the unedited Jesus is offensive to all cultures and in some way or another. And so he goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, and not much is actually known about that town. People think it was a population of 150 to 200 people, somewhere in there, so just some small backwater town. In John 1, Nathanael says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So it's this sort of town of nobodies, this backwater area, not prestigious at all. And Jesus goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath, which was customary in his hometown, and it says they are amazed, they're astonished at the authority he carries when he teaches, his ability to do miracles. But they say, isn't this just the carpenter? The son of Mary, brother of James, and his sisters are here with us. And calling someone the son of Mary, it doesn't translate so well, but that was probably an insult or mockery in that culture. So you never usually called somebody by the son of their mother unless that your mom was a widow, where your dad had passed away. And so calling Jesus the son of Mary rather than the son of Joseph is a way of mocking or insulting him in that time. So Jesus returns to his hometown, and doesn't find welcoming arms, but instead mockery, insult. And not only that, it says, so they were offended by him. Offended by him. The word for offended there is scandalizo. You don't need to remember any of this, but it's where we get the word scandalized. So it can mean to apostatize or renounce or probably reject someone. So they were offended by him. They mocked him, insulted him, and rejected him. And the truth is that Jesus was offensive then, and he's still offensive today. If, again, you don't edit out the parts of Jesus that you don't like, or your culture doesn't like that you're living in this time and place. A few ways that I think Jesus is offensive today, if you were curious. One, exclusivity. How can you believe that Jesus is the only way to God? That's offensive. The reality of hell. How could you believe that people that reject Jesus are eternally separated from him? That's offensive. Or in different cultures, it's probably the opposite, where they would say, it's offensive that God would give grace to people that have done so much harm. Sexual ethics. What do you mean I can't do whatever I want with my body? That sex is reserved for the loving covenant of a man-woman relationship in marriage. That's not only offensive, but that's archaic. Jesus is no less offensive today than he was then. In John, when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one can come to the Father except through me, we think, oh, that's so offensive today. It was offensive then, in a world of many gods. And now Jesus comes on the scene and says, I'm the only way to God. It was just as offensive then as it is now. He's still offensive because truth is offensive. And because truth, by definition, is exclusive. If you're saying one thing's true, well, then you're saying something else isn't true if it contradicts. And so we in our time, we try to say, anything's true, live your truth, whatever. But we know, by definition, that's actually not workable. One truth can contradict another truth, so they can't all be true. You might say the best TV show in the world is Friends or something, and I'd say, no, it's The Office. And we can't both be right. I'm right. But when someone makes a truth claim in a relativistic culture, it's offensive. So Jesus is offensive. He was offensive then. He's offensive now in our culture as well. And so anyone following him, centering and orienting their whole life around this offensive Jesus, is going to carry offense too. So in this passage, the link between the first section, when Jesus goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, and the next section, when he sends out his disciples, the link is the reality of rejection between those two passages. So Jesus purposely brings his disciples, it says they follow him to his hometown, and they witness him being rejected. Almost to say, hey, this is what you signed up for. Get ready. And then after when he's prepping them to go out on their own, he helps them anticipate and prepare for rejection. I mean, what kind of pep talk is that? Right? Hey, can you imagine like a coach doing that? You guys are going to get destroyed. And you're going to get dunked on so hard. But just prepare for it. It'll be fine. We're usually like, oh, you're going to do great. You're going to smoke them, destroy them. These guys don't stand a chance, even if we know it's not true. At least give them some false confidence or something, right? No, not with Jesus. He shoots them straight. You got to love the honesty of him, at least, right? And but the thread between this first and second section is the theme of people rejecting the gospel and the gospel witnesses. So this isn't to depress us, because some people do respond, some people will respond, both to them and from us. But even Jesus himself, greatest evangelist in the history of the world, even he was rejected when trying to share and teach. And so he warns his disciples to basically expect it, to prepare for it. And he prepares them for how to respond when it does happen. If even Jesus himself experienced rejection, and in his own hometown, amongst his own people, why would we be surprised when we're met with rejection for our faith? Famously, John 15 said, if the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. However, you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it. The world hates you. So Mark ties these two scenes together with the reality of rejection and offense. That not only would Jesus face it, but his disciples, and in turn us, would face it as well. So he prepares them. He says, if any place does not welcome you or listen to you, when you leave there, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they're traveling from place to place, preaching the gospel, calling people to repent, having mercy on them, casting out unclean spirits, praying for the sick. But if they reject that, shake the dust off your feet and leave. Now, how many of us, if we're honest, you're going to be honest in church, right? How many of us don't share our beliefs with others because we're afraid of rejection? Begs the question, did we misunderstand the assignment? Jesus, the greatest evangelist, was rejected. Then he says basically to his disciples, hey, if they don't accept you, just do this, move on. He didn't say, everybody's going to welcome you, or everybody's going to respond in the way you hope, yet I shy away from speaking truthfully about what I believe, just being honest about who I am, because I'm afraid of rejection. Easy to speak truthfully in this space. You guys feel safe. Harder to do out there. But Jesus basically says, don't be surprised by rejection, expect it. And he tells them to shake the dust off their feet. Now, what does that mean? Shake the dust off your feet. This was a way of warning them for rejecting the message of Jesus, saying basically, you're responsible for what I told you. It's supposed to make them think twice about it. So you shake the dust off and you leave. Eugene Peterson paraphrased it this way. He said, if you're not welcomed, not listened to, quietly withdraw. Don't make a scene, shrug your shoulders, and be on your way. If they weren't accepted, Jesus told them to move on. Their preaching and then leaving was supposed to be a warning to the people. But ultimately, they didn't stay and try to shove it down the people's throats. They left. If someone rejected the message, they respected their decision. Jesus says, you're free to move on. Now, isn't that actually super freeing for us? How many of us, self-included, feel like it's all up to me? This person's eternity's in my hands. You will believe before we're done with this conversation. I'm not letting you go. It's like a hostage situation, basically. But usually when we do that, we end up doing more harm than good. Now, we don't give up on that person. That's not what I'm saying. I think that's what Jesus is saying. Or we don't stop praying for that person, but we can respect their decision. Maybe they're just not ready yet. Or maybe they will respond to somebody else. Maybe it's not you. Remember a few weeks ago, Jesus, when he was in the Gerasenes region with the demon-possessed man that was freed, and they rejected Jesus. And he leaves. I mean, he's not just the messenger of the gospel. He is the message, and they still reject him. Then he sends the demon-possessed man who is freed back to his own people, and they respond. It says they were amazed. So Jesus tells his disciples, hey, everything is not on your shoulders. You're responsible for your part, yes, but if they don't respond, you can shake the dust off and keep on moving. So it means basically, hey, the ball is in your court. Then move on. Now, before you get too overly excited about a free license to offend others, let's slow down there, buddy. He doesn't tell them to be intentionally offensive. He actually makes them go very humbly. Not as high and mighty people with all sorts of wealth and earthly power, but purposefully with little. And I think what Jesus was doing here, we read that, we're like, no, why can't they take anything? I think what Jesus was doing here in that culture was not letting them take anything with them so that they would actually have to be totally dependent on the locals where they went. And you might think, well, that sounds more offensive, like you're burdening them. Well, not so. He said, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that place. That's not supposed to be read as like a burden of somebody staying forever, but an honor. Where hospitality was a big deal in that culture, more so than it is in ours. And it's not like they were being a burden or annoying. It was being hospitable to someone was an honor. And so he says, stay there the whole time, rather than stay there and then when some better option comes along, more comfortable, more beds, stuff like that, better food, then leave. No, it's, hey, whoever welcomes you, stay with them. Even if it's uncomfortable, you are honoring that person by staying with them, not, oh, okay, I'm going to dip out because I got better options now. So Jesus doesn't tell them to intentionally be offensive. He calls them to go humbly. But that the message itself is what is offensive. Now, additionally, they're not just going and preaching with words alone that people should repent. They're also going and caring for many sick people. So they are going and preaching with their words, but with it, intertwined with it, is serving people with their deeds. And so not only do they proclaim the gospel, but they also embody the gospel. Not one or the other, as we often try to do, but both. So Jesus has them doing everything they can to be humble servants wherever they go. Yet, knowing that the message itself will still be offensive and will lead to rejection in some cases. So Jesus has them going humbly before others rather than going pridefully and pompously. Now, some people are offended by us, not because of the message, but because of the messenger. Sometimes we think we are being so persecuted in this culture, but the reality is that maybe some of us are just being a jerk. You ever think of that? We're prideful. We think we know it all. We come in with our agenda. Again, you're going to believe. We don't listen. We don't ask questions. So we're offensive. We're offensive. Maybe somebody thinks, if this is what a Christian is like, I don't really want to believe because I don't want to be like you. If this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Maybe we're not so much trying to win somebody over to truth, we're just trying to win an argument to prove that we're right. And our hearts aren't actually to glorify God, but more to glorify self. I worry about some of us, not us Christians, other Christians. Our doctrine is on point, but our actions repel others away. And I'm not talking about editing our actions in a way that caves to the culture or anything like that. I'm saying we're living for truth, but we're doing everything we can to be humble. But so many of Christians, especially nowadays in this hyper-divided world, we add offense to the gospel. Our hearts aren't humble, they're proud. We're puffed up with knowledge. I've read all the books, I know everything, and our hearts and actions and presentation of the gospel is actually absent of love. We're preaching a gospel of grace, lacking grace. Francis Schaeffer said this. Francis Schaeffer was an orthodox, Bible-believing, solid man, and he said this: biblical orthodoxy without compassion is surely the ugliest thing in the world. Biblical orthodoxy, which we're all for, hyper important, without compassion is ugly. And that's what we see with a lot of the church now in this time, where our beliefs are right and true, but we're not changed by our beliefs. It's all up here. Our actions, our hearts have not been transformed by the gospel of grace. So we're just out promoting something that hasn't actually done anything to us other than puff us up with pride. So no wonder people don't respond. I wouldn't respond, probably. You know, in Matthew's account of this story, he adds this. Matthew 10:16 says, "Look, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as wise," or some translations say shrewd, "as serpents and as innocent as doves." Now, I'm no biologist, nor a bird watcher, but I think what those animals have in common is saying, be wise, observant, slow to speak, quiet, patient, and gentle. Some of us aren't like a serpent or a dove, but like a bull in a china shop. So we must be careful in how we present the gospel. It's offensive enough. Okay? You don't need to make it more offensive. Our lives should be, we should live beautiful lives, but have an offensive message. Living lives of humility and joy and service and community. Lives that are beautiful even from the outside. People that disagree with us, they still say there's something about how they live. But many will reject the message still and reject you because of it. So, a couple tests for you this morning. Test 1. If people are never offended by what you believe, either you aren't willing to tell anyone what you believe, or you are editing out the parts of your beliefs that are offensive in this time and culture. You've got more of a watered-down, politically correct Jesus. That's test 1. Test 2, if people are constantly offended by you, maybe it's not so much the message or the person of Jesus as much as your actions or your tone or your pride. Maybe people would respond to the gospel if your life matched your beliefs. How'd we do? Many of us fall into one of those two categories. We're either never offensive because we don't speak up about truth, even to those that are close to us, or we're constantly offensive because our actions are not filled with grace and humility. We think about how they rejected Jesus. We think about how people reject us because of our faith. But we also, we so often read the Bible and put ourselves as the heroes of the story. But many of us, to some degree or another, have been the ones that have rejected parts of Jesus. We've all rejected Jesus to some degree in our life, even though we may call ourselves followers of him. Because Jesus is offensive to every group, across cultures, in different ways. So if you've never been offended by Jesus, you might have constructed a Jesus in your own image that thinks like you, acts like you, does everything how you would do it. And we've all turned away from him. We've all been offended by him, even if just for a moment. And every time we turn towards sin, we turn away from him and we say, my way is better. My way is better. Paul in Romans said, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. We've all turned away at some point in our life. And apart from Christ, we have no righteousness. And we often turn away from him still and turn towards these false gospels that we think are going to fulfill us. These false gods, these false idols. So we've all rejected him to some degree in our life. But yet, we can be accepted by him. Paul in Colossians says, once you were alienated and hostile in your minds as expressed in your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. Even though you've rejected him in your life, maybe still do at times, you can be accepted. You were alienated, but you've been brought close through the death and resurrection of Jesus. You're accepted by God, reconciled to him by putting your trust in the work of Christ, that he took your offense, that he lived the life that you couldn't, that I couldn't, and that he died the death that we deserved because we've all turned away. The world may reject us, but Christ accepts us. Think about somebody that you've been so enamored with. You know, maybe it was growing up in school and there was that cute girl that you were just so enamored with. Or, that boy or girl that you wanted to date. You think, oh, if she accepts me, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You're just so caught up in love, or maybe your spouse, you thought, there's no way this person's going to fall for me. I mean, she hung up on me. No. Where you wish that other person would like you. Because, when others reject us, so say the person in your mind, your spouse, or maybe you're growing up or whatever, they accept you. It still hurts when somebody else says no to, going to prom or whatever. But in reality, it doesn't really sting as bad because in that moment, the most important person to you in the world accepts you. Now, if that's true about a prom date, how much more true is it of the creator of the universe? That people will reject us. People will reject the message. And in turn, us. But the God of the universe, who created all this, is mindful of you and accepts you. So even though we've all rejected Jesus to some degree, we can be accepted by him. And if we are accepted by him, being rejected by somebody else, it still stings, it still hurts, but it doesn't carry as much weight. So what do we walk away with this morning? Our lives should be beautiful and offensive. The balance is in Jesus. John 1 said, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We observed his glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of what? Grace and truth. Not one or the other. Both. Some of us are so full of grace, nobody is ever offended by you because you never share. Some of you are so full of truth that people are constantly offended by you because you have no grace. The balance our lives should follow is the life of Jesus, who lived with both. Paul in Colossians says, act wisely toward outsiders, making the most of the time. Let your speech, you're still speaking the truth, but let it be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. He doesn't say, let the contents of your message lack truth. No, but he says, let it be sprinkled with grace. Act wisely toward non-Christians, so you may know how to answer them. You still give them an answer. You still give them an answer, but you wrap it in grace. Peter said a similar thing when he said, be ready to give a defense. We love that verse. Sometimes we unhitch it from the following part that says, do it with all gentleness and respect. So Jesus tells his disciples, if you go and share the truth with them, and if they reject you, you are free to move on. But he gives them specific instructions in that culture that would make it as unoffensive in their life as possible, to go humbly. So in the same way, we must go into the world, into our workplaces, into our neighborhoods, into our families, not shying away from what we believe, just putting it out there, being honest about who you are, not hiding parts of yourself, not putting a mask on, but we do it with lives that are marked by beauty, joy, humility, and grace. Preston Perry, in this book I'm reading, he says this: if someone chooses to reject Christ's message and the beauty of his blood poured out for them when it is given with respect, we can lift up clean hands before God and beg him to remember mercy for their rebellious soul. But if they reject his message because we were offensive in the way we presented it, let us ask God to kill our pride and all the other sin inside us that we might not be in the way of the gospel. We don't ever want our personal conduct or behavior to be the reason somebody rejects the gospel. Church, what if we could live this out in our community here? What if the thousands of people that live right around us, right around the church, right around our homes and our neighborhoods, what if they didn't just hear the beauty of the message of the gospel, but saw the beauty of your lives? And although maybe they were offended by the gospel, they couldn't help but marvel at how you lived. What if we were so full of both truth and grace? And what if we shared that truth, gave a defense with all gentleness and respect? That we take the greatest gift in the world and we deliver it with gentleness and respect. You don't throw a gift at somebody, chuck it at their face. Hey, I got you something really good. Bam! But sometimes that's how we treat the gospel, the gift of grace. What could God do in a church like ours to engage our community if we could proclaim and embody truth and grace? Because the truth is, Jesus is offensive in some way in all cultures, in all lives, if you're not editing him. But while the message is offensive, we as the messenger ought to go humbly and gently because we too are just a product of God's grace. You didn't earn it. Our lives should be beautiful and offensive. Worship team, you can come back up. While we will be rejected by man, we can be comforted in the reality that we are accepted by the most important person in the world, in the universe, and we will be for all eternity in the presence of God. I'll end with this. Matthew 5 says this: you are blessed when they insult you and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Not because of you, because of me. Be glad and rejoice because your reward is great in heaven. Do you believe that? For that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Let's close our time in prayer. Father, so many of us struggle to share our faith, struggle to be honest about who we are. Maybe some of us, we're ashamed of what we believe. We're ashamed of you. God, may we not hide who we are or denounce you, but may we present the truth in such a beautiful way. May you teach us to have humble hearts and beautiful lives and proclaim the truth well. God, may we see through a bunch of ordinary people like us, this neighborhood just turned up for the gospel. Would you prepare people's hearts and prepare ours to be your messengers, that they can be offended by you, not by us. Pray all these things in your name. Amen.